the distant reaches of a world bound by fire, faith, and forgotten gods, a girl is thrown into the sands of a sacred arena. Her name is Eira. She was never meant to survive, never meant to hold a sword. Yet the gods, both old and silent, had other plans. Beneath the chanting priests and the roaring crowd, beneath the bones in the sand and the blood on the stones, lies a truth the Iron Tribunal fears most, that the fire they caged still remembers. Tonight, we step into that forgotten tale, a quiet one, but not gentle. It's a story of ancestral spirits and a mountain that breathes memory. It's a tale where forests whisper forgotten names and sacrifice is the only language the gods still speak. You won't need to follow every name or every battle. This isn't history as it's taught in books. It's a drifting tale meant for after dark. To listen with half-lidded eyes, to feel the flicker of sacred flame across your thoughts as you slowly drift. We'll follow Eira's path, from her trial by blade and ash, to the heights of Mount Carnwaitich, where shadows speak and the fire of the world waits to be woken. So if your thoughts are heavy, if sleep comes slowly, this story will wait beside you. Let it carry you through mist and memory, through the quiet places between the stars and the soil. We begin in the dust and silence of a broken temple. If you enjoy slow-burning myth and forgotten gods, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps keep the stories coming and the flame burning. And now, close your eyes. We begin. The kingdom fell in a single night, no invading army, no warning. Just prophecy, blood, and fire. What if your world died? From within, enter the mythic world of Arhalo, where ancient gods stir, flames vanish, and a hunted girl holds the fate of a broken realm. This is no ordinary fantasy. This is legend reborn. The Burning of Arhalo. Prologue, from the Chronicle of Brother Aldhelm, scribed in the year of our Lord's grace, when the northern winds carried only ash and sorrow asterisk. The night Arhalo fell, the very stones wept blood. I write this by guttering candlelight in the ruins of what once was the greatest kingdom at the world's edge, where the aurora danced green above mead halls and the sacred flame burned bright against the endless dark. The parchment beneath my trembling hand is stained with soot and tears, for I am perhaps the last to remember the glory that was, before it became the ruin that is. It began with the wind, that bitter northern gale that howled down from the Iron Spine Mountains like the breath of dying gods. The sentries upon Arhalo's great stone walls pulled their cloaks tight and cursed the cold, not knowing they cursed their own doom. For on that wind rode whispers of prophecy, fragments of words spoken by dying druids in their grove circles, muttered by monks in their cloistered prayers. When the flame is returned by blood not of the line, light shall rise once more, yet ash shall claim its price. But prophecies are for fools and madmen, or so King Beric Halgson had declared when last I knelt before his throne. Now his blood mingles with the sacred chrism oil upon cold stone, and I wonder if madness is not wisdom's truest face. The king died as winter's heart beat strongest, when the snow lay thick upon the thatched roofs of Arhalo town and ice glazed the narrow windows of the throne hall. I had come to him that evening, bearing scrolls from the southern monasteries, warnings of strange lights seen dancing above heathen stone circles, of livestock found drained of blood beneath symbols carved in tree bark and cliff face. The old magic was stirring, I told him. The druids who had vanished into shadow and silence were whispering again in the hidden places. Beric had laughed, his great hand wrapped around a horn of mead, firelight playing across the golden torques upon his arms. Let them whisper, Brother Aldhelm. Let them carve their runes and burn their herbs. The Christ God's light grows stronger each season, and their time passes like smoke on the wind. Yet even as he spoke, I saw how his eyes drifted toward the narrow windows, where beyond the glass lay the temple of Ermenholt and its sacred flame, that ember of the old gods that had burned without pause since the first king raised these walls. Christian though he claimed to be, Beric Halgson had never permitted that flame to be extinguished. Some bonds, forged in blood and starlight, cannot be severed by prayer alone. Before midnight struck, both king and flame were gone. I found him in the dawnlight, sprawled upon the altar stone of his private chapel where he had gone, he said, to pray. His sword, Griefbringer, that blade forged from star metal in the days when dragons cast shadows over the earth, lay still clutched in his right hand, its point aimed toward the east where the sun should have risen bright. But no sun came that morning, only the gray half-light that falls when the world holds its breath. The sacred oil I had blessed with my own hands the evening before was pooled beneath his body, mixing with blood from the wound that had opened his throat. Someone had come to him in that holy place, someone he had trusted enough to turn his back upon. The killer's identity died with him, but the manner of his death spoke louder than words. This was no mere assassination, but a ritual sacrifice, performed with all the precision of the old blood rites. Outside, the screaming had begun. Arhalo town burned beneath stars that seemed dimmer than they had the night before. Orange flames licked at timber walls and thatched roofs, sending spirals of smoke into the bitter air where they mingled with falling snow. The scent of charred wood and burning flesh drifted on the wind, carrying with it something else, the acrid stench of sorcery, like copper and sulfur and things best left unnamed. But it was not invaders who had come in the night. No foreign army marched beneath battle banners. No longships had beached upon our shores. The destruction came from within, as if the very kingdom had turned upon itself like a mad dog biting its own flesh. Guards struck down guards, fathers raised blades against sons, and in the confusion none could say who commanded and who obeyed. In the temple of Ermenholt the sacred flame was gone. I stumbled through the smoke and chaos to that ancient place, built in the days when the first Halgson kings still honored the old gods alongside the new. The great bronze brazier that had held the flame for 7 generations stood empty, its metal blackened and twisted as if by impossible heat. Around its base, the stone floor was cracked in a perfect circle, and within that circle someone had carved fresh runes, symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon, that seemed to writhe and shift even as I watched. The priests of the temple lay dead around the brazier, cut down as they tried to defend what they had sworn to guard. But strangest of all was old Father Cuthbert, the keeper of the flame, whom I found beneath a fallen beam with his hands still cupped as if he held something precious. His lips moved in soundless words, and when I leaned close I heard him whisper, the fire remembers, blood not of the line." He died before he could say more, but his words echoed the prophecy I had heard on the wind. As the sun finally limped above the horizon, weak and pale as a dying man's smile, I took shelter in the ruins of our scriptorium. The wooden shelves had burned, but some few scrolls survived beneath fallen stones, including the ancient texts I had hidden years before when the bishop ordered all pagan writings destroyed. Star charts marked with symbols older than memory, genealogies tracing bloodlines back to gods whose names were forbidden, and fragments of prophecy written in hands long since dust. It was there, crouched in the rubble like a beaten dog, that I saw her, the shield maiden Brynja Iron Wrist, who had served the old king with blade and oath. She lay dying against the wall, her byrnie torn and bloody, one hand pressed to a wound that would not heal. but her eyes still blazed with the fury that had made her legend among the spear hosts. "Brother," she gasped when she saw me. "The flame! They took the flame." "Who?" I whispered. "Who took it?" She shook her head, silver braids matted with blood. "Not who, what? Something that wore familiar faces. But the eyes were fire and shadow." Her voice grew fainter as the life ebbed from her. "Tell them. Tell whoever comes after. The dead walk when the flame dies. The wolves gather. The old promises wake." With her last breath, she spoke names in the old tongue, Woden and Thunir, Frigg and Tyr, calling upon gods that priests say are demons, but which her people had honored since the world was young. The words seemed to echo strangely in that ruined place, as if something invisible leaned close to listen. And then she was gone, and I was alone with the ashes of a kingdom. In the days that followed, the survivors fled south and east, carrying what they could and leaving behind all they had known. But some few of us remained, not from courage, but from a kind of terrible fascination. We watched as the natural order began to fray at its edges. The cold deepened beyond all reason, until even the hardiest Northmen spoke of moving to gentler lands. Ice formed in patterns that followed no law of nature, spreading like veins of silver across stone and timber. In the burial grounds, the earth cracked and shifted as if the dead grew restless beneath. And from the mountains came howling, not of common wolves, but of something larger and hungrier, with eyes like burning coals. Most disturbing of all were the children who emerged from hiding places we had not known existed. They spoke of a figure in the temple that night, small and cloaked, moving through shadow with purpose beyond their understanding. A child, they said, though whether boy or girl none could say. Someone who had watched and waited, who had spoken words in a language that made the stones themselves tremble. Now I write by the light of a single candle, the last flame left burning in all of Arhalo. Outside, the wind carries strange music, pipes and drums that echo the old ritual songs, calling something from the deep places of the earth. The wolves grow bolder each night, and in their howling I hear almost words, as if they too remember when the world was different. Soon I will join the exodus south, bearing these scrolls and the terrible knowledge they contain. But I fear that distance will not save us, for what was unleashed in Arhalo spreads like fire through dry grass. The sacred flame that held back the darkness has been stolen, and in its absence, older powers wake and stretch and remember their hunger. So fell Arhalo, not to time or blade alone, but to the fading of the last light. The kingdom that stood guard at the world's edge crumbles into legend, its kings and warriors becoming nothing more than names in songs that fewer and fewer remember. And in the embers of its ruin, something ancient stirred. The cold deepened beyond all reason, until even the hardiest Northmen spoke of moving to gentler lands. Ice formed in patterns that followed no law of nature, spreading like veins of silver across stone and timber. In the burial grounds, the earth cracked and shifted as if the dead grew restless beneath. And from the mountains came howling, not of common wolves, but of something larger and hungrier, with eyes like burning coals. Most disturbing of all were the children who emerged from hiding places we had not known existed. They spoke of a figure in the temple that night, small and cloaked, moving through shadow with purpose beyond their understanding. A child, they said, though whether boy or girl none could say. Someone who had watched and waited, who had spoken words in a language that made the stones themselves tremble. Now I write by the light of a single candle, the last flame left burning in all of Arhalo. Outside, the wind carries strange music, pipes and drums that echo the old ritual songs, calling something from the deep places of the earth. The wolves grow bolder each night, and in their howling I hear almost words, as if they too remember when the world was different. Soon I will join the exodus south, bearing these scrolls and the terrible knowledge they contain. But I fear that distance will not save us, for what was unleashed in Arhalo spreads like fire through dry grass. The sacred flame that held back the darkness has been stolen, and in its absence, older powers wake and stretch and remember their hunger. So fell Arhalo, not to time or blade alone, but to the fading of the last light. The kingdom that stood guard at the world's edge crumbles into legend, its kings and warriors becoming nothing more than names in songs that fewer and fewer remember. And in the embers of its ruin, something ancient stirred. Chapter 2. The Cursed Monastery. 3 days from the burning of Arhalo, when ash still fell like snow and the dead walked restless beneath starlight asterisk, the monastery of Dun Alan rose from the moorland mist like a fever dream carved in stone. Eira pulled her cloak tighter as she guided their stumbling horse up the treacherous path, Wolfram's weight heavy against her back. Blood seeped through his makeshift bandages where the ice wolves had found him in the wastelands, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that misted in the bitter air. "There," she whispered, more to herself than to her wounded companion. "Sanctuary at last." But even as the words left her lips, something in the sight of those ancient walls made her skin crawl. The monastery was old, older than the Christian kingdoms, older perhaps than the memory of men. Celtic standing stones had been built into the cloister walls, their weathered surfaces bearing spiral carvings that seemed to shift and writhe in the corner of her eye. Above the main gate, a cross of blackened iron rose against the gray sky, but twined around its base was a serpent with eyes of green stone, and beneath both sacred symbols ran lines of Ogham script that predated Christ's coming to these northern lands. A ring of rowan trees encircled the holy ground, their red berries bright as blood against bark white as bone. Eira had heard the old wives' tales. Rowan trees to ward off the restless dead, the angry spirits, the things that walked between worlds when the barriers grew thin. But as their horse picked its way between those sentinel trunks, she felt no sense of protection. Instead, the very air seemed to thicken, as if they passed through invisible webs that clung to soul as well as flesh. The sound of their approach echoed strangely in the courtyard, bouncing off stone walls in patterns that suggested voices. Whispers in tongues she almost recognized, chanting that rose and fell like distant waves. Wolfram stirred against her shoulder, muttering words in the old language that made the dagger at her hip grow warm. "Brother Aldhelm spoke true," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "This place remembers what was before the Christ God came." The great oak doors of the monastery swung open before Eira could announce their presence, and a figure emerged from the shadows within. He was tall and gaunt, wrapped in robes of undyed wool that hung about his frame like burial shrouds. His head was shaven in the manner of Christian monks, but around his neck, half hidden beneath the rough cloth, gleamed the twisted gold of a torque, the neck ring of Celtic kings and druids. "Peace be upon you, travelers," the monk said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of the southern kingdoms. "I am Prior Cormac, keeper of this house. We saw your approach in the seeing bowl and prepared a place for your wounded companion." Eira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "Seeing bowl?" The prior's pale eyes crinkled at the corners, but his smile held no warmth. "We are observers of the old ways, child. The Christ God teaches us to tend the sick and shelter the weary, but the sight was a gift from before his coming, and we do not cast aside gifts lightly. He gestured toward the monastery's entrance, where other robed figures now appeared like shadows given substance. Come, your friend requires healing that only we can provide. They carried Wolfram to a cell deep within the monastery's heart, past corridors lined with alcoves where candles flickered before icons of Christ. But this was not the golden-haired savior of southern paintings. Here, the Redeemer's eyes blazed with green fire. His robes were the gray of storm clouds, and in his hands he held not a lamb but a burning branch. The scent of old parchment and older blood hung in the air, mixed with something else, the iron tang of fear and the sweet decay of secrets long buried. He has been touched by the ice wolves, Prior Cormac observed as they laid Wolfram upon a narrow cot. Their bite carries the cold of the grave, the silence that comes before the final darkness. We have remedies, but the price of such healing runs deep. Eira knelt beside her mentor, taking his cold hand in hers. What price? Truth, child, always truth. The prior's fingers traced the air above Wolfram's wounds, and Eira saw runes flicker briefly in the space between flesh and stone. You carry something that should not exist in this world, something forged in the time before time, when gods walked the earth and fire was young. We felt it calling to us across the leagues, singing songs that make the very stones remember. Her hand moved instinctively to the dagger's hilt, and the weapon pulsed with warmth like a living heart. Around them, the monastery seemed to lean inward, the walls themselves listening. "The blade of Tyr Firebringer," whispered one of the other monks, an ancient man whose eyes were white with cataracts, forged from star metal in the first days, quenched in the blood of the world serpent. We have read of it in scrolls that predate the Gospels, in runestaves carved when Rome was young. Prior Cormac nodded gravely. The blade that was to pierce the heart of darkness when the final hour came. But the sacred flame is stolen, the old wards are failing, and the god of silence stirs in his ancient sleep. Tell us, child, do you know what you carry? Do you understand the weight of prophecy that rests upon your shoulders? Before Eira could answer, the temperature in the cell plummeted. The candles guttered as if struck by an arctic wind, and the very shadows seemed to deepen and take shape. From somewhere beyond the walls came a sound like grinding metal, like the gates of the grave swinging wide. "He comes?" breathed the blind monk, his face gone pale as corpse linen. "The night of the iron tribunal. The god of silence has found us." The monastery's bells began to toll, not the measured cadence of prayer, but the wild, desperate clamor of alarm. Through the narrow window came a sound that made Eira's blood run cold. The scrape of iron on stone, drawing ever closer. Prior Cormac was already moving, pulling ancient volumes from hidden shelves, muttering incantations in a mixture of Latin and the old tongue. "The Gisa," he said urgently, "the binding words that have kept this place safe for 300 years. But against such as this." The oak doors of the monastery exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Through the shattered would stepped a figure from the deepest nightmares of men. Tall as a tree, armored in plates of black iron that seemed to drink the light from candle and hearth alike. No face was visible within the depths of its helm, only a darkness so complete it hurt to look upon. In its gauntlet hands it bore a sword that was absence made manifest. Not black, but void, a hunger that devoured sight and sound alike. The shadow knight moved through the corridors of the monastery like death itself, and where it passed, silence fell. Not the gentle quiet of prayer or contemplation, but the crushing absence of all noise, all breath, all hope. Monks fell before it without a cry, their bodies unmarked but their eyes gone dark as winter stones. Wolfram struggled to rise from his cot, one hand reaching for his sword hilt. Eira, run! But there was nowhere to run. The shadow night filled the doorway of their cell, and the temperature plummeted until their breath came in white plumes. When it spoke, its voice was the whisper of wind through empty tombs. "The blade," it said, each word falling like lead into water. "Give us the blade, and your deaths will be swift." Prior Cormac stepped between the night and Eira, his hands weaving patterns in the air that left trails of silver fire. By the sacred oak and the holy cross, by the names that were spoken when the world was young, I bind you. Return to the darkness that birthed you. The shadow night tilted its head, almost curious. Then it raised its void sword and brought it down in a single contemptuous stroke. The prior's spell light died like a snuffed candle. His body crumpled to the stone floor, not wounded but somehow emptied. The life had simply gone out of him, leaving only a husk wrapped in monk's robes. Wolfram roared, a sound like a wounded bear, full of fury and desperate love. He lunged forward, his own blade singing from its sheath, and for a moment the cell blazed with honest steel and honest courage. But the ice wolf's poison had weakened him, and the shadow night was a thing of darkness and silence, untouchable by mortal weapons. The void sword took Wolfram in the chest, passing through his leather byrnie as if it were mist. No blood flowed, but frost spread outward from the wound, and his face went gray as old ashes. He fell to his knees, then forward onto the cold stones, his breath coming in shorter and shorter gasps. "Eira!" he whispered, and in his eyes she saw all the love and regret of a man who had tried to be father, teacher, and shield to a girl who would never again be safe. The prophecy. Remember the prophecy. Blood not of the line. You are the key. His hand reached toward her, trembling with the last of his strength. Go to the dead wood. Find the druid Maelwyn. Tell him the flame-bearer has come. The shadow night turned its attention to Eira, raising the void sword for a killing blow. But as it moved, something strange happened. The dagger at her hip blazed suddenly with inner fire, and the runes carved into its blade became visible through the leather sheath. The shadow knight hesitated, and in that moment of uncertainty, Eira acted on pure instinct. She dove for the narrow window, kicking out the ancient shutters, and tumbled into the night beyond. The monastery sat on a cliff face, and only by the grace of the old gods did she land in a snowdrift deep enough to break her fall. Behind her, she heard the sound of stone cracking, of timber catching flame, as if the very monastery rejected the presence of such darkness. Their horse had fled when the shadow knight arrived, but there was a sled in the monastery's stable, a crude thing meant for hauling supplies up the treacherous mountain paths. Eira dragged Wolfram's unconscious form from the burning building, loaded him onto the sled, and began the desperate flight into the wilderness beyond. The night was alive with unnatural sounds. From the monastery came the screams of dying monks, cut short by that terrible silence. From the dark woods came howling, not the natural call of wolves, but something deeper and hungrier, with echoes of fire and forgotten magic. And beneath it all, carried on the wind like a lover's whisper, came words in a voice she did not recognize. To the mountain child of ash and ember, The path begins in the dark. Behind her, the monastery of Dun Alan collapsed into ruin, its ancient stones no match for the weight of darkness that had claimed it. The rowan trees blackened and withered, their protective power broken, and in their place grew thorns that gleamed like polished bone. Eira pulled the sled deeper into the forest, following paths that seemed to open before her feet as if the earth itself conspired to hide her from pursuit. Wolfram's breathing grew ever weaker, but still he clung to life with the stubborn strength that had made him legend among the spear hosts. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lay the dead wood, and in that haunted place, if the old stories were true, dwelt Maelwyn the Last, druid and star reader, keeper of secrets older than kingdoms. Whether he would prove friend or foe, Eira could not say. But with Wolfram dying and the Shadow Knight hunting her trail, she had nowhere else to turn. The dagger at her hip pulsed with warmth, as if responding to her desperate need. In its rhythm she heard something like a heartbeat, like the slow breath of sleeping fire. And in the wind that followed them into the deep woods, she heard whispers of prophecy, of blood and flame and the price of salvation. The sacred flame was calling, and she was beginning to understand that she might be the only one who could answer. Chapter 3: The Path Through the Dead Wood. The boundary stones stood like broken teeth against the gray dawn, their surfaces carved with warnings in the old tongue. Sylvaneth, the runes whispered, the dead wood. Eira's breath misted in the frigid air as she stumbled past them, Wolfram's sword heavy across her shoulders, the strange dagger burning cold against her ribs. Behind her, the smoke of Thornwick still darkened the sky. The screams had finally died. The forest welcomed her with the silence of the grave, the threshold of shadows. Ancient yews and oaks twisted skyward, their bark blackened as if by some primordial fire, inscribed with spiraling runes that hurt to look upon directly. The earth beneath her feet was soft with moss and centuries of rot, releasing the sweet sick stench of decay with each step. No birds sang here, no wind stirred the branches, yet the dead wood was not truly silent. Whispers drifted between the trees, not words, but the memory of words, spoken by tongues long stilled. Pale lights flickered in her peripheral vision, corpse fires that cast no warmth and threw no shadow. When she turned to face them, they winked out, only to dance mockingly behind her once more. Eira pressed deeper into the word grove, driven by a terror greater than any forest spirit. The Iron Tribunal's hounds would not follow her here. Even zealots feared the thin places where the veil wore gossamer fine. But as hours passed and the gray light never brightened, she began to understand why. The trees seemed to shift when she wasn't watching. Paths that led north suddenly curved south. The moss-covered stones that should have marked her way appeared and vanished like fever dreams. Her water ran low, her strength lower still. By the third day, or what she thought was the third day, for time moved strangely in Sylvaneth, Eira could no longer tell if the voices she heard were real or born of her fraying mind. Lost child, they murmured from hollow roots and shadowed groves. Lost and far from home. I have no home, she whispered back, and immediately cursed herself for answering. The old stories warned that speech invited attention in the dead wood, attention from things that had forgotten how to die. The hunt of memory. The Barrow Wights came on the fourth night. Eira huddled beneath an overhang of stone, gnawing the last of her hardtack, when she heard them rustling through the undergrowth. They moved like mist given weight, translucent figures in the tatters of ancient burial shrouds. Their eyes were holes in the world, and they sang in harmonies that predated human tongue. Remember us, daughter of the living. Remember and join our eternal dance. Asterisk. She pressed herself against the cold stone, hand tight on Wolfram's sword. But what could steel do against beings already dead? The wights circled closer, their song growing stronger, and Eira felt memories that were not her own bleeding into her mind. A feast in a great hall, mead horns raised in toast, the glint of gold-twisted rings. No, she bit her tongue until blood filled her mouth, using pain to anchor herself to the present. I remember my own ghosts, she snarled at the pale shapes. I need no others. The wights paused in their circling, as if considering her words. Then, with sounds like wind through winter reeds, they melted back into the darkness. But Eira knew they would return. The druids' grove. Dawn brought no relief, only a deeper gray that seemed to seep into her bones. Eira stumbled through the forest, her vision swimming, legs trembling with exhaustion. The dagger at her side had grown heavier, its strange metal warm against her ribs despite the bitter cold. She was dying. She knew it with the clarity that comes only at the end of hope. The dead wood would claim her, add her voice to its chorus of the lost. Perhaps that was justice. Perhaps she deserved no better fate than the innocents she had failed to save. The ground gave way beneath her feet. Eira tumbled down a hidden slope, through bracken and thorns, until she came to rest in a dell she had not seen from above. Here the trees grew differently, not twisted with ancient malice, but curved in patterns that spoke of older purposes. Stones arranged in careful circles caught what little light filtered through the canopy. And at the center of it all, beside a spring that ran clear over silver stones, sat a man, or something that had once been a man. He was old beyond the counting of years, his hair and beard white as bone, his skin marked with spiraling tattoos in blue and ochre. Crow feathers adorned his shoulders, and the pelt of some great wolf served as his cloak. When he looked up from the fire he tended, his eyes held depths that spoke of winters beyond number. "So," he said, his voice like the creaking of ancient wood, "the Starbearer comes at last to the Word Grove." Eira tried to stand, failed, tried again. "I don't know what you mean, old man. Don't you?" He gestured toward her side, where the dagger's outline was clearly visible beneath her torn cloak. "That blade has been singing to me for 3 days, child. Singing of starfall and prophecy, of the ending of ages, the revelation of star metal. The druid, for what else could he be, in this place between worlds, beckoned her closer to the fire. Against all wisdom, Eira obeyed. Warmth felt like a forgotten blessing against her frozen limbs. "I am Maelwyn," he said, offering her a cup of something that steamed and smelled of herbs she could not name. "Last of the Oak Speakers, keeper of the old ways. And you, Starbearer, are more than you know. My name is Eira." She hesitated, then drew the dagger from its hiding place. In the firelight, it gleamed like captured starshine, its surface flowing with patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. Maelwyn leaned forward, breathing in sharply. "Ethon steel," he whispered. "Sky metal, fallen from the void between stars. I had thought all such blades lost to legend. What does it mean?" "It means, child, that you carry a weapon forged in the elder days, when gods walked among men and the Veatir stalked the world with fire and shadow." His tattoos seemed to writhe in the firelight as he spoke. "Such blades were made for a single purpose, to slay the god beasts, those ancient things that predate throne and temple alike." Eira stared at the dagger, its impossible beauty suddenly terrible in her hands. "The old stories. are not stories at all, but memories. Maelwyn's eyes held hers across the flames. The Vaetir sleep now, most of them, bound by the changing of the world. But one wakes, one stirs in the heart of Mount Carnwaitach, where the sacred flame once burned eternal. The weight of prophecy. Why me? The words tore from Eira's throat like a wound. I couldn't save my village. I couldn't save anyone. What god would trust such a task to one who has already failed? Maelwyn was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those ancient eyes. You think the gods choose only the worthy, the triumphant? Child, they choose those who understand loss, those who know the weight of failure, for they alone can comprehend the true cost of victory. I don't believe in your gods, Eira said, though her voice carried little conviction. I've seen too much suffering to trust in divine purpose. The Flamekeeper, Maelwyn said, last of the great Vaetir, fed by the dying embers of the sacred flame. It has slept for centuries, but now the world grows dark once more. The old powers stir. If the Flamekeeper wakes fully, if it consumes what remains of the sacred fire, darkness. Eira finished the thought, understanding flooding through her like ice water. Eternal night. Just so. And only Ethon steel can pierce the hide of a god beast. Only a star blade can cut deep enough to find its heart. The choice ahead. Eira stood, the dagger heavy in her grip. Around them, the dead would whispered its endless laments, but the druids' grove felt suddenly like an island of warmth in an ocean of shadows. If I accept this, if I believe, she struggled with words that felt like chains. Does that make me nothing more than a weapon? A tool in the hands of gods I cannot see or understand? Maelwyn's smile was sad and knowing. That choice is yours alone, Starbearer. The blade may know its purpose, but you must choose whether to fulfill it. Free will is the last gift the gods gave to mortal kind. They will not reclaim it, even now. And if I refuse, then the world ends a little sooner. Perhaps that too is mercy. Eira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every death she had witnessed, every life she had failed to save. Then she thought of other villages like Thornwick, other innocents who might yet be spared if she found the courage to act. When she opened her eyes, Maelwyn was nodding as if he had seen her choice written in her face. Then you will need guidance, he said. The path to Mount Carnwaitach is treacherous, and not all the dangers you will face are supernatural. Men can be more terrible than any forest spirit. Men, belief is not required, Maelwyn replied. The star metal knows its purpose, even if you do not. The blade chose you long before you drew it from whatever corpse bore it last. Eira looked again at the dagger, remembering the moment she had pulled it from the fallen knight's chest. Had it truly been chance that led her to that particular death among so many? Mount Carnwaitach, she said finally. What waits there? Maelwyn's expression darkened. Beyond these woods lies Derngate, last great city of the northern realm. The Iron Tribunal holds sway there, and their hatred of the old ways burns hotter than any sacred flame. He met her eyes across the dying fire, and beyond Derngate the mountain. But first, Starbearer, you must survive men. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the stones of the ancient grove. In the distance, the dead would sang its songs of endings. But here in Maelwyn's sanctuary, something new was beginning. Eira sheathed the star blade and shouldered Wolfram's sword once more. Then we had best be moving, druid. The dead have taught me that delay serves no purpose save despair. As dawn finally broke through the canopy above, painting the grove in shades of silver and gold, two figures emerged from the heart of the word grove. One bore the wisdom of ages, the other the burden of prophecy. Between them, they carried hope like a guttering candle into the growing dark. Chapter 4. The Iron Tribunal. The first sign of Derngate's dominion was the smell, not of wood smoke or hearth fires, but of burning hair and rendered fat that clung to the wind like a pestilence. Eira pulled her hood lower as they crested the final hill, though no fabric could shield her from the sight that sprawled below. Derngate rose from the barren plain like a canker of black stone, its walls carved with scripture in 3 dead tongues. Iron runes had been hammered between the holy words, crude symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon, designed to ward off spirits and mark the unclean. Watchfires burned atop every tower, their flames never dimming, fed by the bones of heretics and the wood of sacred groves. "The god of silence and ash," Maelwyn whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. Black and crimson banners snapped from the battlements, each bearing the same symbol, the Ashen Cross, its arms twisted like the limbs of a hanged man. Wolfram's breathing had grown shallow during their descent. The old warrior slumped against his horse's neck, one hand pressed to the wound in his side where the Shadow Knight's blade had found its mark 3 days past. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark as the soil of forgotten battlefields. "We could go around," Eira said, though she knew it was futile. The wound had festered. Without the herbalist's quarters inside the city walls, Wolfram would die before they reached the next settlement.
"No."
His voice was iron wrapped in silk. "I've lived too long to die cowering in some ditch. If the tribunal wants my bones, they can pry them from my sword hand." The gates of Derngate yawned before them, flanked by gibbet cages where the remains of druids and fortune-tellers swayed in the wind. A crowd had gathered in the square beyond, pilgrims and penitents drawn by the spectacle of suffering, their faces lit by the glow of another pyre. They pushed through the throng, past merchants hawking holy relics and children begging with stumps where hands should be. The air was thick with incense and the chanted prayers of the faithful, but underneath ran currents of fear and suppressed rage. "Deus silentiae cineris asterisk," he intoned, his voice echoing off the walls. "Asterisk, purge the impure, cleanse the defiled, let their blood water the roots of righteousness." The gate crashed open, and Eira was hauled into the light. Sand crunched beneath her feet, sand mixed with bone meal and the ashes of the condemned. They pressed a notched blade into her hand, its edge dull as a butter knife. Across the pit, her opponent emerged from the shadows. Once, perhaps, he had been a man. Now he was something else. A zealot gladiator whose face was hidden behind an iron mask shaped like the tribunal's god. Burned scars covered his arms where holy symbols had been carved into his flesh, and his movements held the fluid grace of a predator. "Fight well, little heretic asterisk," he whispered, his voice like grinding stone. "Asterisk, your death will sanctify this sacred ground." He came at her in a rush, his blessed blade seeking her heart. Eira twisted aside, feeling the steel part the air where her head had been. She had no training, no skill, only desperation and the memory of Wolfram's lessons shouted over clashing steel. "Your enemy's strength is also his weakness. Use it." The masked gladiator's next strike shattered her guard, sending the notched blade spinning from her hand. She rolled desperately, sand grinding between her teeth, as his weapon carved gouges in the arena floor. Above them, the crowd roared its approval. Children sat on their father's shoulders, watching with bright eyes as the heretic girl scrambled for her life. The High Inquisitor leaned forward in his gilded box, savoring every moment of her degradation. But in the highest tier, hidden among the common folk, Maelwyn raised his hands to the darkening sky. The charm on his wrist began to smoke, its river reed fibers blackening as he spoke words in the old tongue, words that had been forbidden since before the tribunal's founding. Blood welled from self-inflicted cuts on his palms, falling drop by drop onto the stones. Spirits of the wild wood, hear my call. Ancestors who sleep beneath the sacred hills, wake and remember. I offer my life's blood for passage between the worlds. Come and reclaim what was stolen. The wind shifted, carrying scents that had no place in this sanctified city. Loam and leaf mold, the musk of running deer, the green breath of growing things. Shadows lengthened though the sun still burned overhead, and in those shadows, shapes began to stir. In the arena below, Eira's strength was failing. The gladiator's blade had opened cuts along her arms and ribs, painting her skin with spreading crimson. She backed against the arena wall, trapped like a rat in a pit. Then the darkness moved. It came from the gaps between stones, seeping upward like black water. Spectral shapes flickered at the edges of vision. Wolves with eyes of starlight, ravens whose wings trailed mist, and behind them all, the tall figures of the ancient dead. The crowd's cheers turned to screams. Parents clutched their children as the shadows reached for them with fingers of ice and moonlight. Some of the faithful tried to pray, but their words turned to ash on their tongues. The masked gladiator spun toward the disturbance, his blade raised against enemies that cast no shadows. In that moment of distraction, Eira struck, not with steel, but with the jagged stone she had palmed from the arena wall. A crude weapon, but one that found the gap between his mask and gorget. He fell without a sound, his blessed blood steaming on the sand. The arena erupted into chaos. The High Inquisitor's guards formed a protective circle around their master, but the spirits cared nothing for mortal authority. They flowed through the tiers like a tide of memory and loss, and where they passed, the living remembered what had been taken from them. In the commotion, Eira climbed the arena wall, her hands finding purchase on stone worn smooth by centuries of blood. She reached the stands just as Maelwyn collapsed, the life draining from his face as the price of his summoning came due. "The sword," he gasped, pointing toward the arena's royal box where Wolfram's blade lay among the trophies of the condemned. "Take it. He meant for you to have it." She followed his gaze and saw the old warrior's body sprawled before the High Inquisitor's throne. Wolfram, who had held the gate against a dozen soldiers before falling to their blessed blades. Even in death, his face held no trace of submission. Fighting through the panicking crowd, Eira reached the sword just as the spectral tide began to ebb. She wrapped her fingers around the familiar grip, and for a moment she could swear she felt Wolfram's hand guiding hers. "Light the fire again." His voice seemed to whisper from beyond the veil. For all of us. The weight of the blade felt different now. Not just steel and leather, but legacy and responsibility. The frightened girl who had fled through burning forests was gone, consumed in the fires of loss and fury. What remained was something harder, something that would not bend beneath the weight of tyrants' chains. With Maelwyn leaning heavily on her arm, she fought her way toward the gates. The spirits were fading now, their borrowed time nearly spent, but their work was done. The tribunal's perfect order lay in ruins, its faithful scattered like leaves before the storm. Behind them, The High Inquisitor's voice rose above the tumult, calling down curses and promising retribution. But Eira no longer ran from such threats. She had seen the fear in his eyes when the old powers stirred, had watched his certainty crumble before forces older than his god. They reached the city gates as the last of the spirits melted back into shadow. The guards had fled their posts, leaving only empty armor and abandoned spears. Beyond the walls, the road stretched northward toward the distant peaks of Mount Cairnwaitich. "Where now?" Maelwyn asked, his voice barely a whisper. Eira looked back at the burning city, not burning with flame, but with whispers and omens, with the awakening of things that had slept too long. The sacred flame called to her from its prison among the peaks, and she finally understood her purpose. She was no longer running toward something unknown. She was walking toward a destiny that had been written in stars and sealed in blood before her birth. The Ember-bearer had awakened, and the old powers stirred in answer to her call. "Forward," she said, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "to where no mortal hope has yet returned." The road ahead was dark, but darkness held no terror for her now. She had looked into the abyss of the tribunal's righteousness and found it wanting. Whatever waited in the shadow of Mount Cairnwaitich, she would face it with steel in her hand and fire in her heart. Behind them, Derngate burned with invisible flames, and the iron tribunal swore vengeance on winds that carried no answer but the echo of ancient laughter. Chapter 5: The Mountain of Whispers. The world grew strange as they climbed. Eira first noticed it in the silence. How the forest held its breath, how even the wind seemed to whisper in languages she half remembered from dreams. Beside her, Maelwyn moved with the careful steps of a man walking through a graveyard, his weathered face pale beneath his hood. "The mountain knows we're coming," he murmured, pausing beside a stream that flowed uphill, its waters catching starlight that shouldn't exist in daylight. Cairnwaitich has always been a thin place. The old gods built their thresholds here, where the worlds touch. Above them, Mount Cairnwaitich rose like a broken tooth against the sky, its peak wreathed in mists that moved against the wind. Ancient stone circles dotted the slopes, half buried in snow and time, their purpose lost to all but the mountain itself. Eira could feel something watching from those weathered stones, not malevolent, but vast and indifferent as the stars. They passed through groves where phantom armies flickered in and out of sight, warriors from ages past locked in eternal battle. Eira glimpsed mail-clad figures with bronze swords, painted warriors with torques of gold, and others too strange and ancient to name. Their weapons sang through mist-thick air, their war cries echoing in languages that predated kingdoms. "Are they real?" she asked, watching a spectral king fall beneath the spears of his enemies, only to rise and die again moments later. "Real enough," Maelwyn replied. "Time loops here, like water in an eddy. The mountain remembers everything. Every death, every prayer, every drop of blood spilled on its stones." He pointed to carvings on a nearby boulder, Pictish spirals and dragon shapes worn smooth by centuries of wind. "These were old when my grandfather's grandfather was young. The mountain holds all of it." As they climbed higher, the visions grew stronger. Eira saw Wolfram standing beside a meltwater pool, his face unmarked by the flames that had claimed him. He looked at her with eyes like winter sky, and she couldn't tell if his expression held forgiveness or accusation. When she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the echo of his voice on the wind. The price of power is always paid in full. Maelwyn suffered his own ghosts. He stumbled once, reaching out to catch himself against empty air, and she saw him mouth words in the old tongue. Apologies, perhaps, or prayers to gods he'd helped forget. His eyes held the weight of centuries, the burden of a man who'd watched his world die and helped bury it. "I see them," he whispered. "All of them. Brennos the last king with his crown of iron thorns. Morwen Firehair, who called down lightning with her voice. They stand in their hall of glass and bone, and they ask me why I turned my back on the flame." His hand found the star-metal dagger at his belt, fingers tracing its alien edge. Perhaps they'll have their answer soon. The path grew treacherous as they neared the summit. Ice-slick stones gave way beneath their feet, and more than once Eira felt invisible hands guide her steps away from hidden crevasses. The air itself seemed thick with presence, not hostile, but alien, as if they walked through the dreams of sleeping giants. Ancient bones jutted from the mountainside like the ribs of some primordial beast. Here lay a king's crown, fused to skull and stone by ages of frost. There, a bronze cauldron filled with ice that never melted, its sides etched with spirals that hurt to look upon directly. The mountain was a tomb and temple both, a repository of power too dangerous for the world below. At the peak, they found the entrance. It was little more than a crack in the stone, sealed with symbols that shifted and writhed when Eira tried to focus on them. The air that breathed from within smelled of ash and ancient flame, and something deeper, the scent of time itself, heavy and metallic. Maelwyn pressed his palm against the seals, speaking words in the old tongue that made the mountain shiver. The stone groaned and split, revealing a descending passage that glowed with its own pale light. "Once we go in," he said, not looking at her, "there's no turning back. The Wrm of Ash guards what we seek, and it's older than kingdoms, older than the memory of trees. It will ask a price for the sacred flame's heart, and that price is always blood." "I see them," he whispered. "All of them. Brennos the last king with his crown of iron thorns. Morwen Firehair, who called down lightning with her voice. They stand in their hall of glass and bone, and they ask me why I turned my back on the flame." His hand found the star-metal dagger at his belt, fingers tracing its alien edge. Perhaps they'll have their answer soon. The path grew treacherous as they neared the summit. Ice-slick stones gave way beneath their feet, and more than once Eira felt invisible hands guide her steps away from hidden crevasses. The air itself seemed thick with presence, not hostile, but alien, as if they walked through the dreams of sleeping giants. Ancient bones jutted from the mountainside like the ribs of some primordial beast. Here lay a king's crown, fused to skull and stone by ages of frost. There, a bronze cauldron filled with ice that never melted, its sides etched with spirals that hurt to look upon directly. The mountain was a tomb and temple both, a repository of power too dangerous for the world below. At the peak, they found the entrance. It was little more than a crack in the stone, sealed with symbols that shifted and writhed when Eira tried to focus on them. The air that breathed from within smelled of ash and ancient flame, and something deeper, the scent of time itself, heavy and metallic. Maelwyn pressed his palm against the seals, speaking words in the old tongue that made the mountain shiver. The stone groaned and split, revealing a descending passage that glowed with its own pale light. "Once we go in," he said, not looking at her, "there's no turning back. The Wrm of Ash guards what we seek, and it's older than kingdoms, older than the memory of trees. It will ask a price for the sacred flame's heart, and that price is always blood." The passage opened into a vast chamber carved from living rock, its walls blackened by fires that had burned since the world was young. The floor was ankle-deep in ash that glittered with fragments of bone and metal, the remains of offerings spanning millennia. And at the chamber's heart, coiled around a pillar of volcanic glass, lay the WRM of ash. It was beautiful and terrible, a creature of ember and shadow whose scales caught the light like cracked obsidian. Its head was larger than a shield, crowned with horns that curved like ancient antlers. When it opened its eyes, they burned with the deep red of forge fire, ancient and knowing. The sacred flame's relic pulsed within the pillar, a heart of living fire trapped in crystal. Eira could feel its power calling to her, promising strength enough to challenge gods and kings. But the WRM stirred at their approach, its voice a sound like distant thunder. Asterisk, who comes seeking the flame that burns between worlds? Asterisk, the words weren't spoken but carved directly into their minds, each syllable weighted with eons. Asterisk, the price is written in the old laws. Blood of wisdom, blood of years, blood freely given by one who remembers the first songs. Asterisk, Maelwyn stepped forward and Eira saw him clearly for the first time. Not the broken old man who'd helped her flee the tribunal's justice, but the druid priest he'd been, keeper of mysteries and guardian of thresholds. His eyes held depths like dark water, reflecting years beyond counting. I am Maelwyn Treefriend, last of the crow-touched, servant of the old gods who sleep beneath the world's skin. His voice rang with power that made the chamber's walls hum in harmony. I offer what is mine to give, the years I've lived, the wisdom I've gathered, the blood that remembers when dragons first taught fire to men. They descended into the mountain's heart. The WYRM's massive head dipped in acknowledgement, ancient courtesy between creatures who understood the weight of oaths. Asterisk, you know the cost, Firebearer's friend. Your life will feed the flame, but the wisdom dies with you. The girl will carry the ember alone. Asterisk, no, Eira breathed, reaching for him, but Maelwyn had already drawn the star-metal dagger, its edge gleaming like captured starlight. This is how it must be, he said, his voice gentle as a father's. The old laws demand payment, and I'm too steeped in the ancient ways to cheat them. You'll bear the flame, Eira. You'll be the bridge between the dying world and what comes after. But remember, power always scars those who wield it. He pressed the dagger's hilt into her nerveless fingers, guiding her hand to his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. Here, he whispered, quick and clean, as befits a priest of the old faith. Don't let me linger. The blade slid home with surprising ease, star-metal parting flesh like water. Maelwyn's blood, dark and rich with years, spilled over her hands and onto the ash-strewn floor. Where it touched the ground, flowers of flame bloomed, not destroying, but transforming, turning ash to fertile earth. The WRM's roar shook the mountain as Maelwyn's life flowed out, and with it came visions, the true history of the world, written in blood and flame and starfall. Eira saw the first compact between mortals and the old gods, saw how the sacred flame had been divided and hidden when the Iron Tribunal rose to power. She understood, in one terrible moment of clarity, exactly what she'd inherited. The crystal pillar cracked, and the sacred flame's heart flew to her like a living thing, searing itself into her palm with pain that rewrote her very bones. She felt something vast and alien touch her mind, the presence of the old gods, stirring from their long sleep. They were not kind, these ancient powers. They were forces of balance and change, as indifferent to human suffering as winter to the prayers of freezing men. You are the ember-bearer now. Asterisk, they whispered in voices like grinding stone. You carry our flame in mortal flesh. Use it well, for the world grows cold and dark, and only fire can wake what sleeps. When the visions faded, she knelt alone beside Maelwind's body. The old druid's face was peaceful, his eyes closed as if in sleep. The wyrm of ash had vanished like smoke, its purpose fulfilled, leaving only the scent of distant flames and the echo of ancient power. Eira's hand bore a scar now, not just a wound, but a mark that pulsed with inner fire, shaped like a star or perhaps a flame. She could feel the sacred flame's power coiling within her, waiting to be called upon. But she could also feel its weight, the burden of carrying divine fire in mortal flesh. She wrapped Maelwind's body in her cloak and carried him from the mountain's heart, step by painful step. The phantom armies parted before her, and the strange stars wheeled in their courses as if marking her passage. At the peak, she raised a cairn of ancient stones over his grave, speaking the words he'd taught her in the old tongue. A prayer for the dead, a promise to the living. The mountain gave her the flame, but it took something more. As she began her descent, Eira felt the first whispers of what she'd become, no longer fully human, no longer entirely mortal. The ember bearer, carrying the fire of the old gods into a world that had forgotten how to burn. Behind her, Mount Cairnwhite settled back into its eternal silence, keeper of secrets and guardian of the spaces between worlds. The real work was only beginning. Chapter 5: The Mountain of Whispers. The ascent began before dawn, when mist still clung to the lower ridges like funeral shrouds. Mount Cairnwhite rose before them. Not a mountain in any earthly sense, but a wound torn between worlds, its black stone ridges jutting skyward like the ribs of some primordial beast. Each step carried Eira and Maelwind deeper into the old world's domain, where time folded upon itself and the dead walked openly among the living. Jagged cliffs bore the scars of forgotten hands, Pictish spirals carved deep into basalt, their centers worn smooth by centuries of pilgrim touches, and Norse bind runes etched in precise lines that seemed to shift when glimpsed from the corner of one's eye. Higher still, ancient battle banners hung frozen in glacial ice, their colors long faded but their shapes unmistakable. The raven of the Northmen, the boar of the Celts, the cross of the Christmen, all trapped together in eternal, silent vigil. "The mountain remembers," Maelwind said, his breath forming white plumes in the thinning air. His voice carried an odd resonance here, as if the stone itself was listening. Every blood spilled, every oath sworn, every god called upon in desperation, they echo still. Eira felt it too, the weight of accumulated memory pressing against her skull like a fever dream. The wind carried impossible scents, burnt offerings and spilled blood, though no fire burned on these barren slopes. Above them, the sky writhed with unnatural storms, and the aurora pulsed like veins of green fire, each throb synchronized with the mountain's hidden heartbeat. As they climbed, reality grew thin. Eira heard the clash of steel beneath the howling wind, phantom battles layered over the present moment like translucent paintings. She saw them clearly now, berserkers foaming at the mouth as they charged into walls of Christian shields, their bare pelts streaming behind them, monks clutching wooden crosses, their prayers becoming war cries as they met the heathen charge. All of them caught in endless combat, neither victorious nor defeated, bound by the mountain's curse to fight until the world's ending. "Wolfram?" she whispered, seeing a familiar silhouette among the ghostly warriors. The figure turned, and for a moment it was him, her sworn protector, her friend, her guilt. His face bore the wound that had killed him, a gaping slash across his throat, but his eyes held no accusation. Instead, they seemed to offer something like forgiveness or perhaps a warning. When she blinked, he was gone, leaving only the taste of ash on her tongue. "You see him," Maelwyn observed, not unkindly. "The mountain strips away the veils we weave around ourselves. Here, truth and memory are the same thing." They climbed higher, past the realm of earthly snow into regions where the very air seemed crystallized with ancient power. Maelwyn moved with increasing difficulty, each step a visible struggle. His mortal flesh was rejecting this place, Eira realized. He was too much a creature of the between times, neither fully of the old world nor the new. But still he pressed on, driven by some inner knowledge that he had not yet shared. In the swirling mists above, vast shapes moved, not gods as mortals imagined them, bearded kings upon golden thrones, but forces older and more alien than human understanding. Eira glimpsed the Horned One, antlers broad as ship's masts, eyes like winter stars. The Grey Mother passed by in a rustle of raven wings, her face a void that reflected every sorrow ever shed. Fire-eyed spirits danced in spirals that hurt to look. They spoke not in words but in symbols that burned themselves into her consciousness. The spiral of death and rebirth, the serpent coiled around the world tree's roots, the blade that cuts both ways. Messages meant not for her mind but for something deeper, the part of her soul that still remembered when gods walked openly upon the earth. Maelwyn staggered, falling to one knee on the sharp stone. When he raised his head, his eyes were haunted by visions of his own. "I see it all," he gasped. The last of the sacred groves burning, the Veatir fleeing into shadow as the new faith spread like wildfire. "I see myself. I see what I have done and what I failed to do." "What did you do?" Eira knelt beside him, offering her shoulder for support. "I preserved what I could," he said, struggling to his feet. "But preservation is not the same as salvation. I kept the ember alive, but I could not keep the fire burning. And now I see what price that required." The summit lay before them, a circular plateau carved from living rock. At its center, a crater yawned like a mouth, and from its depths rose the arm of ash. It was not a creature of flesh and scale, but of smoke and ember, its form shifting between states of matter. Its body was composed of cinders that had never cooled, held together by will and ancient binding. Coal pit eyes reflected eons of stolen flames, and when it breathed, the air itself grew dimmer, as if the beast fed on light itself. Around its massive coils, the stones of the plateau were scorched black, yet gave off no heat. They had been burned by cold fire, the flame that consumes without warming. Upon directly, their forms shifting between flame and shadow and living rune. "The guardian of the sacred ember," Maelwyn said, his voice barely a whisper. "Bound here by sacrifice magic, tethered to the mortal realm by bonds of blood and sorrow. It has waited so long for this moment." The WRM's great head turned toward them, and when it spoke, its voice was the sound of dying fires and collapsed hearths. "The old compact holds. The flame shall not pass to unworthy hands. You have climbed far, mortals, but you shall climb no farther." "I know you." Maelwyn stepped forward, his staff glowing with pale light. "I helped forge the chains that bind you here. I was young then and proud, and I believed we could preserve the old ways by hiding them from the new world. But hiding is not the same as living, is it?" The WRM's ember eyes fixed upon him with something like recognition. The Keeper. Yes, I remember your scent. You reek of compromise and half measures. You would keep the flame alive but never let it burn. No longer. Maelwyn turned to Eira, and she saw in his face the weight of centuries, the exhaustion of a man who had carried burdens too long. The binding can only be broken by sacrifice, the same magic that forged it. But it must be freely given, willingly offered. He pressed something into her hand, her star-metal dagger, the blade that had drunk the blood of Veatir. And it must be you who wields the knife. Understanding crashed over her like a cold wave.
No.
There has to be another way. There is no other way, he said gently. This is what I was preserved for, child. Not to see the new world born, but to midwife it into being. The WIRM is bound by the old sacrifice magic, threefold death at a sacred site, offered in the proper manner. Only such a death can loose the bonds. The WIRM watched this exchange with ancient patience, neither cruel nor kind, merely waiting for the cosmic scales to balance. I cannot ask this of you, Eira whispered, the dagger heavy in her trembling hand. You are not asking. I am offering. Maelwyn's smile held a peace she had never seen before. I have walked between the worlds for too long, Eira. Let me finally choose a side. He began to chant then, in the old tongue, words that seemed to reshape the very air around them. The runes carved into the mountain stone began to glow, responding to the ancient syllables. This was sacrifice as the druids had known it, not mere death, but transformation, the willing dissolution of one form of existence to enable another. By blade, he said, offering his throat. By flame, he gestured toward the WRM's burning eyes. By water, he touched a tear that had begun to slide down his cheek. Threefold death to break the threefold binding. Eira's hand moved without conscious thought, guided by some power greater than her own will. The star-metal blade found its mark with surgical precision, and Maelwyn's life poured out in a rush of crimson that steamed in the cold air. But even as he fell, his chant continued, the words now coming from the mountain itself, from the stones and wind and burning sky. The WIRM let out a sound like 1,000 hearths going cold at once. Its ember form began to dissolve, the ancient bindings that had held it snapping one by one like overstressed chains. The compact ends, it whispered as its substance scattered on the wind. The flame returns to the world of the living. From the crater's depths rose a pillar of light, not harsh and blinding, but warm as summer hearth fire, ancient as the first spark struck by human hands. The sacred ember, no longer guarded, no longer hidden, pulsed with the rhythm of a beating heart. Eira reached toward it, and the moment her fingers touched the light, pain lanced through her being. Not physical agony, but the birth pangs of transformation. A flame-shaped scar burned itself into her palm, and through that mark the sacred fire poured into her mortal flesh, remaking her from within. She was still Eira of Branwen's Hollow, still the girl who had fled burning villages and watched friends die. But she was also something more now, the ember-bearer, keeper of the old world's flame, the bridge between what was and what would be. The fire lived within her now, wild and ancient and merciless in its perfect balance. Maelwyn's body had already begun to fade, his mortal shell no longer able to contain his essence in this thin place. But his spirit lingered for a moment, visible as a wisp of smoke that touched her cheek like a blessing. "Remember us," he whispered, his voice carried on the wind. "Remember what we were and what we dreamed of being. Let the flame burn true, but let it burn with love. Then he was gone, dispersed into the mountain's memory like all the other ghosts that haunted these heights. Eira stood alone at the summit, the sacred ember burning steady and sure within her transformed flesh. Behind her, Mount Carnwedge settled into silence, its whispers finally stilled. The phantom warriors had faded, the ancient banners had crumbled to ice dust, and even the storm-racked sky seemed calmer. She began her descent, each step carrying her back toward the world of the living, toward Arhalo and the Iron Tribunal and all the battles yet to come. Fire licked beneath her skin with every heartbeat. The mountain whispered no more behind her. From the crater's depths rose a pillar of light, not harsh and blinding, but warm as summer hearthfire, ancient as the first spark struck by human hands. The sacred ember, no longer guarded, no longer hidden, pulsed with the rhythm of a beating heart. Eira reached toward it, and the moment her fingers touched the light, pain lanced through her being. Not physical agony, but the birth pangs of transformation. A flame-shaped scar burned itself into her palm, and through that mark the sacred fire poured into her mortal flesh, remaking her from within. She was still Eira of Branwen's Hollow, still the girl who had fled burning villages and watched friends die. But she was also something more now, the Ember-bearer, keeper of the old world's flame, the bridge between what was and what would be. The fire lived within her now, wild and ancient and merciless in its perfect balance. Maelwyn's body had already begun to fade, his mortal shell no longer able to contain his essence in this thin place. But his spirit lingered for a moment, visible as a wisp of smoke that touched her cheek like a blessing. "Remember us," he whispered, his voice carried on the wind. "Remember what we were and what we dreamed of being. Let the flame burn true, but let it burn with love." Then he was gone, dispersed into the mountain's memory like all the other ghosts that haunted these heights. Eira stood alone at the summit, the sacred ember burning steady and sure within her transformed flesh. Behind her, Mount Carnwedge settled into silence, its whispers finally stilled. The phantom warriors had faded, the ancient banners had crumbled to ice dust, and even the storm-racked sky seemed calmer. She began her descent, each step carrying her back toward the world of the living, toward Arhalo and the Iron Tribunal and all the battles yet to come. Fire licked beneath her skin with every heartbeat. The mountain whispered no more behind her. When she opened her eyes, they held emberlight, fire trapped behind frost, ancient and terrible and sad. The prophecy unraveled itself before her like a scroll written in flame. Asterisk, when the flame is returned by blood not of the line, light shall rise once more. Asterisk, not blood of kings, but blood of the threshold walkers, the God-touched who belonged fully to neither world. She understood now why the sacred flame had called to her across the years, why the old god's whispers had always found her in the dark spaces between sleep and waking. Time collapsed, past and future folded like wings around her, and she saw it all, Arhalo's fall from the perspective of ravens, watching the Iron Tribunal's banners rise over smoking ruins. She saw Maelwyn as a young woman, binding the WRM with rites older than written words, tears freezing on her cheeks. The old gods fading like morning mist, their essence flowing into stones and streams and the bloodlines of those who remembered. And she saw what was to come, herself standing before the gates of Arhalo with an army of shadows and flame at her back. Forest folk and freed spirits, exiled knights and hedge witches, all those whom the Iron Tribunal had cast out or forgotten. She saw the siege, saw herself facing the High Inquisitor beneath the broken spires of the old temple. Saw her own death, or was it ascension? The image blurred between triumph and tragedy, ending and beginning. The world reshaped by fire and shadow, not in victory, but in balance. Eira pressed her palms against the stone altar, feeling the weight of it all. Divine power and human grief crashed together inside her chest like opposing tides. She was still herself, still the girl who had loved Gareth's quiet strength, still the woman who mourned Maelwind's sacrifice, but she was becoming something else, too, something necessary and terrible and strange. Can I lead a people while no longer fully human? The question hung in the thin mountain air, unanswered. But beneath it, she felt the sacred flame pulse in her bones, warm and patient as summer earth. It was not about leading, she realized. It was about bridging, about standing at the crossing place between the world that was dying and the world that might yet live. The wind changed direction, carrying scents from the south, wood smoke and wild honey, the green growing smell of forests that remembered their own names. Arhalo waited in the distance, broken and occupied, its sacred fires cold. The Iron Tribunal ruled there now with righteousness sharp as sword edges, cutting away everything that did not fit their narrow vision of how the world should be. But they had never faced the God-touched. They had never stood against someone who carried the ember of the old ones in her very blood. Eira rose, her shadow strange and flickering in the dying light. Maelwind's staff lay nearby, abandoned beside the altar. She lifted it, feeling its weight settle naturally in her grip. The wood was warm, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. She thought of Gareth, buried beneath the avalanche, of Finn, lost to the tunnel whites in the darkness below, of Maelwind, who had given everything so that the sacred flame might find its way home. Their sacrifices would not be meaningless. She would carry them south with her, along with the fire in her veins and the terrible knowledge of what she was. The rebellion she would lead would be unlike any that had come before. Not just a fight for land or gold or even freedom, but a war for the very soul of the world. She would gather the forgotten ones, the cast-out ones, the ones who remembered the old songs and the old ways. Together they would march on Arhalo, not to restore a fallen kingdom, but to birth something new from its ashes. Something that honored both the wisdom of the old gods and the fierce hope of mortal hearts. The path down from Mount Cairnwaitach stretched before her, winding through snow and stone toward the distant green lands of the south. Each step would carry her closer to war, closer to the confrontation that would reshape the world or destroy it trying. She was no longer the girl who had fled Arhalo's burning. She was the ember-bearer now, the bridge of fire, the God-touched daughter of two worlds. In her veins the ember stirred, not for conquest, for balance. Epilogue, the flame rekindled. The twilight sky bled crimson over Arhalo's shattered heart, casting long shadows through the skeletal remains of what had once been the most sacred temple in the north. Eira stood at the threshold of the ruined sanctuary, her footsteps silent against the ash-carpeted stones. The sacred ember pulsed within her chest like a second heartbeat, its warmth the only thing that kept the bitter wind at bay. The altar lay before her, cracked marble veined with soot, its surface scarred by flame and time. Here, generations of priests had tended the eternal fire that bound the old world to the new. Here, that same flame had died in darkness and betrayal. The stone still bore the memory of its heat. Though cold now as winter bone, Eira approached with reverence. Each step a prayer whispered to gods whose names had been forgotten by most. The ember burned brighter as she neared the altar, its light seeping through her skin like dawn through morning mist. She pressed her palm to the blackened stone, feeling the echo of ancient fires that had once danced here. "I offer what was given freely," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Blood of my blood, flame of my flame." The ember erupted. Fire burst from her palm, not the violent orange of destruction but something purer, silver white touched with gold, a light that seemed to sing. It spread across the altar like water finding its course, following the carved channels that had once channeled offerings to the gods. The flame rose higher, casting no smoke, generating no harsh heat, but filling the ruins with a warmth that reached deeper than flesh, deeper than bone. The wind stilled. In that sudden hush, other voices stirred. Whispers carried on currents that touched no mortal ear. The old gods spoke in the language of rustling leaves, in the distant howl of wolves that roamed the northern mountains, in the flutter of raven wings against stone. Their words were half-heard echoes, ancient syllables that bypassed understanding and spoke directly to the soul. Eira, daughter of two worlds, keeper of the balance, the shadows danced differently now, stretching and shifting as if alive. In their movements, she glimpsed faces, old and young, human and other, all watching with eyes that held the weight of eternity. The flame grew higher, its light touching the broken walls. The collapsed ceiling opened to stars that seemed suddenly closer, brighter. But with the flame's awakening came a terrible understanding. Eira felt herself changing, her mortal flesh growing translucent, her spirit caught between worlds. She could no longer remain among those she had sworn to protect. The price of her covenant was separation, transformation into something neither fully human nor entirely divine. The mist began to rise from the earth around the temple, silver white like the flame itself. It swirled about her ankles, her waist, climbing higher with each passing moment. She felt herself dissolving, becoming part of the night, part of the legend that would outlive kingdoms. "The flame burns again," she spoke to the emptiness, her voice now carrying harmonics that had not been there before. "Let it burn eternal, a reminder that some prices are worth paying, some sacrifices made in love rather than duty." The mist claimed her completely, and she was gone. Not dead, not alive, but something other. The flame danced alone on its altar, steady and bright, casting its gentle light across the ruins where morning would find the first pilgrims drawn by rumors of miracle and mystery. In the years that followed, bards would sing of Eira the Flamekeeper, she who bridged the gap between old faith and new, who stood guardian at the threshold of worlds. They would tell of how the sacred flame burned bright once more, tended by no mortal hand yet never faltering, never dying. Parents would point their children toward Arhalo and speak of the balance that must be kept, the vigilance required when ancient powers stirred. But sometimes, when the wind blew just right across the northern wastes, travelers claimed to glimpse a figure in the flame's light, a woman with eyes like stars, watching from the spaces between shadow and flame. Whether guardian spirit or ascended soul, none could say. The flame burned on, eternal witness to mystery, and in its light, the question lingered like smoke on still air. Had Eira truly left this world, or did she simply watch from places where mortal eyes could not follow, forever keeping her vigil between the worlds of the living and the divine?